Morning to my friends in US as well as good evening to and warm welcome to all for this Friday webinar. And today we are privileged again to have our guest speaker, Professor Koray Simsek, associated with Kramer School of Business. We know his work related to in the areas related to social responsible investments. Today he will be discussing with us on the concept of ESG, why ESG is becoming important for an investor perspective, and how impacts are evaluated on ESG scales by an investors in measuring both financial as well as non-financial parameters for an enterprise. So for detailed discussion on ESG, I would request Professor Koray to kindly start his presentation. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mr. Mazumdar. It's a pleasure to be with the Global Links Impact Investment Forum stakeholders again through another webinar. Today, I'm going to put my educator hat on, and I would like to talk about how to bring ESG investing topics into classroom to enhance the learning of our students. And I'd like to share my experience with you as a professor here at Kramer School, as well as best practices from other schools elsewhere in the world. So what I would like to basically highlight today is just refresh our memories a little bit so that we're all on the same page about some definitions in the world of ESG investing. So I'll talk about the spectrum of ESG investing in that regard, and then I will briefly talk about student managed investment funds, a very popular experiential learning tool vehicle in finance curriculum. And then finally, I'm going to talk about our schools, Kramer School's student managed portfolio, and how we weave ESG investing into that portfolio. So let me begin with some definitions, and you're familiar again with some of these definitions, but in the world of ESG investing, these definitions are somewhat important because in some cases, without definitions, the terminology may mean different things to different people. What is impact investing? Global Impact Investing Network is an excellent resource with lots of data and lots of definitions. And they highlight the definition of impact investing as investing with the intention is really key here, to generate positive, measurable, non-financial impact alongside a financial return. So I highlighted some words here. The intention of an impact. So the impact should not be accidental, and there's definitely a purpose there for generating impact as well as financial return. So that's a very important aspect. And measurability of that impact is also critical in this definition. So there should be an agreement on what that impact is. And in this regard, the area of impact becomes important, and that's how impact investing is linked to the world of ESG investing, because typically the areas of impact or the categories of impact are these three main groups: environmental, social, and governance or corporate governance. And that's why, even though there is a lack of consensus in terms of some of the definitions in this space, I would like to say that for the purposes of this webinar, or in general, the way that I actually use these phrases or terms, I think ESG investing can be seen as a general framework that encompasses not only impact investing, but other types of flavors of investing that are driven by goals other than financial goals. In that respect, you may compare traditional investing and impact investing, obviously, as well as other flavors of ESG investing. So I'm going to borrow from a few resources that I think are useful in terms of making those comparisons and contrasts, if you will. Cassot and Grollo, in a financial analyst journal publication, they actually compared traditional investing and impact investing with respect to these three layers. Impact investing is a dual objective endeavor. You are hoping to make money and do good at the same time, whereas in traditional investing, there's a single objective, to make more money. In traditional investing, you don't intentionally seek non-financial impacts, but as a side effect, you may see it. In impact investing, you intentionally seek non-financial impact. And in traditional investing, you don't really care about whether, how to measure the impact that you have, the non-financial impact. In impact investing, you actually do care about it, and you anticipate the impact to take place and meet certain benchmarks with respect to that. Impact management project has a really very nice framework that defines the ESG investing flavors from the perspective of investors that provide capital. So they say basically, on the spectrum of capital, where do different investors, traditional investors, responsible investors, philanthropists, where do they land with respect to these financial goals and impact goals? And you can see that on the far left, you have the traditional investors who only care about financial goals, meaning generating risk-adjusted, competitive risk-adjusted financial returns. And then on this side, you have philanthropy, who are willing to accept full loss of capital, and they really don't care about any financial return or anything of that sort, but they do care a lot about generating impact. And then in this spectrum, anywhere in between, highlighted by these labels: responsible investing, sustainable investing, impact-driven investing, these are actually flavors of what I called ESG investing earlier. As impact management projects, as ABCs, where you see the responsible investing is there is an intention to reduce the risk with respect to these dimensions, ESG dimensions. In sustainable investing, right here in the middle, there is an intention to generate positive outcomes. So it's one layer beyond just risk mitigation. And then in impact investing, there is an intention to make a contribution to the solutions, which may actually be even at a cost of accepting lower returns. With this framework in mind, in this webinar, when I say ESG investing, it may apply to responsible investing, sustainable investing, and impact-driven investing, because you're going to see that the schools that I'm going to be talking about, who try to bring ESG investing into their curriculum, are trying to actually do it in one of these ways. So not necessarily impact investing, not necessarily sustainable or responsible investing, but they're trying to do ESG investing in one form or another. So here's another matrix of how you can actually see different examples of these investments, not only how they're highlighted with respect to the ABC classification, but on this side, with respect to the categories of environmental, social, and governance. dimensions. So for example, if you're trying to mitigate risks and you are the A type of investor, the responsible investor type of provider of capital, and you care about environmental risks, then if you're a good example is investing in or excluding fossil fuel companies from your portfolio. If it's social, excluding, again, not investing in tobacco companies. And if what you care about is governance, look at the governance rating and do not invest in companies who have poor governance ratings. So you see different ways of incorporating different types of ESG investings depending on what theme you're interested in. It can be a combination of these things, but it can be purely in one theme that is highlighted by E, S, or G letters in the ESG world. Now, obviously, with these definitions, I hope I clarified some terminology, but to be fully honest with you, this world is still evolving a little bit. And that's why when you start or when you consider teaching ESG investing or bringing ESG investing into the classroom, this lack of consensus actually creates an issue. So I should acknowledge that teaching of ESG investing actually is still evolving. Partly due to, again, a lack of formal consensus in terms of these definitions that I talked about, and also in terms of how they're measured as well. And some of these measurements are done in the public investment domain through these ratings called ESG ratings or sustainability ratings. And there is, again, a lack of consensus in terms of which methodology is best in terms of measuring that type of impact. And there was a really very nice Financial Times article, actually, that highlighted that in their special report on MSc in finance programs. And at the end of my presentation, I'll be sharing a list of references with you. So this article is in that list as well. But despite this ongoing evolution, we see that an increasing number of schools are actually using a very popular experiential learning tool to teach their students ESG investing. And that's actually what we call student managed investment funds. And you may argue that experiential learning or active learning, learning by doing, is really one of the best methods of learning in terms of retention of learning. So this really becomes very useful. This tool, this vehicle becomes very useful especially when it's feasible to use it. So you may ask, what is a student managed investment fund? The definition that I'm going to use for that is it's an active learning vehicle where you put the students in the driver's seat, in the seat of decision makers, and they make decisions for a real investment portfolio. In other words, there's real money involved, and there are real decisions that are made with that money, and those decisions are made and defended by the students themselves. So this is as real as it gets, as you can see. It's not really a simulation. It actually is very much the epitome of experiential learning. The students really experience actual decision-making, real decision-making. But make no mistake, just like ESG investing has many flavors, student-managed investment funds have many flavors too. In terms of structure, you see that some student-managed investment funds are embedded in a structured class. So they are very much curricular activities. They're part of the curriculum. And you would see that some of them are formed around an investment club, a student club, which you may actually see either as an extracurricular activity or a co-curricular activity. In terms of responsibilities of students, you actually see also differences. Most student managed investment funds have students make recommendations to an advisory board and go through an approval process before any transactions take place. Whereas in some student managed investment funds, you actually see that students have sole responsibility for the management. In terms of source of capital, there are differences. With some student managed investment funds, you see that a part of the school endowment is carved out and the students manage that part. Whereas in some student managed investment funds, external donors actually provide the capital and tell the student managed investment fund is, well, here's what the portfolio that we would like you to manage. What happens to the proceeds, that also may be a source of difference. Sometimes the proceeds or the returns, profits of these funds are used to fund scholarships directly. Sometimes they just provide contributions to the school's general fund. I'd like to share some stats in terms of these student managed investment funds in general. Based on a recent survey by Student Managed Investment Fund Consortium, there are around 600 student managed investment funds in the United States, and in total, they manage approximately $750 million. The oldest one was established back in 1946, but you would see when you look at the data that most of these 600 funds were established in 2 decades spanning 1990 to 2009. The largest is managing $62 million, and the smallest one is managing $2,000, whereas again, most of them are managing somewhere between $1 to $2 million. The data outside the United States is not complete, but there was a survey by Ludwigsen Carini and Tao Li from University of San Francisco back in 2018, and they found 36 non-US student managed investment funds, and in their survey, there are 3 actually funds from India. So there is a type of student managed investment fund or a subcategory of student managed investment funds who focus exclusively on ESG investing. And they got organized under the umbrella recently of what's called Sustainable and Impact Investing Learning and Knowledge Network. And Silk Network right now has around 40 student managed investment funds in North America, and roughly they're operating $70 million. So if you think about it, about 10% of all the student managed investment funds in North America. So this is actually a very good start, and you can see that in terms of their sizes. About a quarter of them are really small compared to the others, managing less than 100K, but some of them, about a third of them, are quite large, managing more than 750,000 US dollars. And again, Silk Network has an extensive survey with details on these, and I will provide some of these for you, but I'll also, again, share the references so that you can actually go to their website to see some of these things. So where did they get the funding, the sources of capital for these 40 ESG, sustainable investing focused student managed investment funds? You can see that the majority is actually from donations, about 45%. And then a carved out portion of the university endowment is also 41%. So that's a substantial sum too. A very small amount is coming from direct investors or university departments' own sources. What do they invest in? Well, the majority of them invest in public equities, but a good number of them actually invest in private equity as well. They also use fixed income instruments, bonds to a certain extent, and mutual funds and ETFs are also used by about 10 of them. what is the objective of these funds? What is their primary focus in terms of those ESG flavors that we talked about? So they also asked, Silk Network asked these 40 schools in their survey, what is your primary focus, secondary focus, and tertiary focus? And you can see that ESG integration, which is that B level, benefiting stakeholders level, and impact investing really is leading the primary focus, and positive and negative screens, which you may actually think as avoiding harm, the responsible investing flavor, that actually is the third type in terms of primary focus. So you can see a range of ESG investing flavors here that these 40 funds actually follow. Let me give you some examples, specific examples from a few schools. Northeastern University Impact Fund, they just invest in private equity. And as an example, they basically try to provide flexible capital into their geographic area, Boston, and they support sustainable businesses there that address social and environmental challenges faced by underserved communities and stakeholders. Portland State University, their impact investing fund, also invest in private equity, but not through debt, but through other channels. And they focus on investing in early stage companies, again, in their geographic area, Pacific Northwest, and especially in the city of Portland. Others, Yale University, the Whitehall Social Responsible Investment Fund, invest in public vehicles like ETFs, mutual funds, but also community development financial institutions, types of banks. And they do interesting things. They try to do shareholder engagements, and they own stocks to try to improve the company's corporate responsibility standards. They were actually the very first student managed investment fund to co-file a shareholder resolution with a public company, Exxon, back in 2016. Bryant University is another example. Their Archway Investment Equity Fund also invests in public investments, ETFs and stocks, and they integrate ESG risks and opportunities into their security selection to improve the average ESG score of the equity fund. Which brings me to our story, Crummer, because we're very similar to Bryant in that sense. But before we actually incorporated student managed ESG investing in our student managed investment fund, I should acknowledge that we do much more of that in terms of sharing sustainability notion, the ESG notions, social responsibility, corporate social responsibility with our students in many classes. Actually, we have two concentrations: social entrepreneurship and sustainable enterprise, and finance, that focus on these topics that are under the umbrella of ESG investing. We have elective classes on the social entrepreneurship side, strategic corporate social responsibility, creating sustainable business practices, but also on the finance side, security analysis and portfolio management, managing global portfolios, that we actually talk about these topics. We use not only a student managed investment fund, but we have case studies, we do simulations, and we have consulting projects that our MBA students can actually work on that incorporate various aspects of the ESG world. And our student managed investment fund is part of this class, managing global portfolios. So what do we do in our, what does our student managed investment fund look like? It started in 1999 with a donation from a local bank, or the local branch of a regional bank, SunTrust Bank, and they gave us $500,000 in 5 installments. And over the last 22 years, our students actually managed to grow this $500,000 to $1.2 million. And on top of that, this portfolio distributed $500,000 in scholarships since 2004. So we're very proud of their work of our students in their impact. Some key aspects of this class and this portfolio is they really adopt a mindset of investment professionals. This is a real world application. They manage real money, and they utilize skills outside of finance, like critical thinking. Communication skills are very important. How they actually convince the advisory board in terms of their recommendations, both in a written way and with an oral presentations. They help future students because they generate scholarships. And for most of them, this course helped generate job opportunities as well. You may actually find past annual reports of this portfolio on our library's dedicated website, which is here. And again, I'm happy to share this and other resources with you at the end of my presentation. So how do our students actually implement their methodology, and where does ESG investing come into play? Our portfolio trades only once a year. So they have to really strategically make strategic decisions. And our students follow a top-down approach, which is outlined and governed by an investment policy statement. So they start with a team consensus for the economic environment expectations for the next 12 months. Based on that team consensus, that macroeconomic outlook, they determine how much of the portfolio should be invested in equities, public equities, and in ETFs, and how much should be invested in fixed income bonds. The equity portion is invested in 11 GIG sectors. These sectors are consumer discretionary, consumer staples, information technology, utilities, you name them, 11 sectors defined by MSCI and S&P. And in each sector, there is a sector analyst, and the sector analyst determines how much of their sector is invested in a sector ETF and how much should be invested in 2 publicly traded stocks that they are going to be selecting within their sectors. So this sector allocation is important because it needs to be consistent with the economic outlook. So if they're expecting a strong economic environment, for instance, our students actually overweight a sector like consumer discretionary, which may benefit from an economic boom. But what's really important is our students use an overlay theme for their stock picks, which is ESG. So that's how our students integrate ESG investing into their decisions in our student managed investment portfolio. So what do they do? Since 2018 and 19 year, our students actually demanded that they wanted to use companies' ESG initiatives as a catalyst in their stock selection. And to do so, they started reading a lot about those companies and also looking at ESG ratings as an additional screening tool. And that helped them pick better performing companies and avoid poor performing companies, because our students believe that those ESG ratings and ESG initiatives of those companies can actually differentiate good companies from bad companies, and it may add to shareholder value. And our students argue that consequences of poor ESG policy for those companies are volatility in their earnings, accounting irregularities, higher operational costs, and litigation, among other things. And benefits of good ESG policy is being anticipatory in terms of regulatory changes, social changes, and managing supply chain risk. To give you an example, in terms of their selections, our students actually tilted our portfolio higher than the S&P 500 average ESG ratings based on the FTSE Russell ESG ratings. So 3.52 compared to 3.25 out of a 1 to 5 scale. So to sum up this discussion, how can we bring ESG investing into the classroom? Student managed investment funds sounds like an exciting and excellent opportunity to enhance our students' understanding of impact and ESG investing because it incorporates hands-on learning. But in order to do that, we should ask a few questions. We should consider a few questions. And I'm going to borrow this from a very nice toolkit document from the Silk Network. You should first consider if there are any current student managed investment funds at your school. So we had one for 20 years and we were able to incorporate it into that fund. That's one thing to look at. Instead of creating an additional fund, it's a possibility to incorporate it to the existing one. Are there currently any impact investing focused professors? Well, fortunately, we had some on board here and we were able to do that. Are there currently any impact investing classes? There may not be a dedicated impact investing class, but there can be a combination of classes where impact investing or ESG investing learning can take place. And last but not the least, a very important question: could the school get donations to kickstart this fund, or could the school carve out a portion of the endowment so that the students can contribute their ideas to generate impact? So with that, I am going to stop here and thank you all for listening, and I am open to any questions that you may have.
Thank you, Dr. Simsek. We do have some questions in the chat box. I will read them out to you one by one.
Okay.
So the first question that we have is from Mr. Majumdar. He's asking, does high ESG score companies produce lower returns in general?
Not necessarily. Actually, the verdict is still out on this. That's an excellent question, Mr. Mazumdar. There are some papers, some academic papers that show that high ESG score is related to high returns and performance, and there are some actually that go against this. So the results are inconclusive, but a very recent paper by George Serafeim, and I forgot the name of his co-authors, but George Serafeim showed that if you focus on not the minor issues, I mean, I don't want to downplay the significance of ESG issues, but if you focus on more significant ESG issues, companies who are rated higher in those significant material ESG issues actually indeed do perform higher returns in general. So there seems to be a link between high ESG performance and high rates of returns, but it needs to be really material ESG issues. Immaterial issues or issues with less significance do not seem to have a significant impact. I hope that answers your question.
We have another question from a student. She is asking, how is the impact measurement carried upon for ESG investment?
That's a very good question. The impact measurement, obviously, for the purposes of these ratings, these rating companies have their proprietary methodologies, right? FTSE Russell has a methodology, Sustainalytics has a methodology, S&P has a methodology. So they have their own proprietary methodologies, very much like the credit rating companies, right? We have Moody's, Fitch, Standard & Poor's. So with their proprietary methodologies, they are disentangling these ESG dimensions and creating many questions, many layers for each and every one of them, and that's how they're measuring them. But there are other methodologies, more publicly available methodologies. Again, one of the sources that I earlier shared with you, Impact Management Project, they have a very interesting methodology with like a set of questions and how their significance relate to different dimensions of impact. And those types of methodologies are especially helpful when you are in the private investing domain. With public equities, obviously there are these ratings and there are these resources, but with evaluating private investment, it's harder, obviously, with the lack of data, but impact management projects framework provides a good way to do that. And as I mentioned before, I will share these with you, and many of these links actually will point you towards those sources. And I believe I shared the link for the impact management project in the previous webinar. So if you look at the references in the previous webinar, you would get there. Other questions?
Dr. Banerjee is asking, in SMIF, how does the institution ensure money is not lost? Is a faculty made in charge?
Excellent question. Again, Professor Banerjee, as I said, there are two types, but most of them actually, most of the student managed investment funds in the United States do have an advisory board and overseeing board of overseers. And of course, there's a faculty also supervising the students as well. Ensuring money is not lost, obviously is impossible. The money will be lost. I mean, if the markets are down, money will be lost. But there are obviously faculty members supervising and the advisory board reviewing the recommendations of the students. And the students actually do take these very seriously. So because they know what's at stake, they don't want to make rash decisions. They make very thoughtful and careful decisions, and they at the end of the day, yes, the next 12 months can be an unsuccessful year in terms of profits, but I'm happy to say that the students actually do a really good job in terms of ensuring the risk management of the portfolio as well. And the investment policy statements actually do guide the students in that regard. So they are bound by an investment policy statement too.
She also has a question. She's asking, is it time bound during their degree program?
So the way that we do is at Crummer, it is part of a class. So what that means is the students who sign up for that class for that duration of that semester, they actually end up making the recommendations and making the decisions for that year. And then we trade once a year. So for the next 12 months, the portfolio makes no movement. It's the same portfolio that is carried over to the next year's students. So in that respect, in this class is an elective class. So that takes place just before they graduate. So what we do to keep a connection between year to year is that we keep previous year's students as guest speakers for next year's students, and also provide a report to them in terms of how their portfolio, how their selections performed. And that kind of creates a cycle in the long run. Other questions?
We have one more question from a student. She's asking, do you think investors will turn towards ESG investment if there's some benefits like lower tax rate, or will it not make any difference?
That's a good question. I don't think the tax consequences of ESG investing is well understood or analyzed. And I did mention a few benefits in the in one of the slides about the benefits of a good ESG policy. And again, lower tax rate is not one of those necessarily. But as I mentioned earlier, some recent studies show that ESG investment or ESG focused investment, especially when it's geared towards material ESG events and material ESG factors, do seem to have long-term positive benefits in terms of rates of returns. So I think that in and of itself may help get a lower tax rate just because you will be able to avoid portfolio turnover, which typically increases tax rate in terms of your investment portfolio. So that I think may be helpful. But again, not any type of ESG investment, but specifically more material ESG factors.
I don't think we have any more questions. So thank you. Thanks a lot, Professor Koray, for yet another engaging webinar.
Sorry to interrupt, Survi. There was a question from Dr. Conway that does Professor Simsek know the names of the Indian schools where a student managed investment fund is in operation? He mentioned there are 3 in India.
Yes. So let me actually take out my screen here. So the paper, the paper that I mentioned, the paper from Sincarini and Lee, that paper has a list. Again, they acknowledge that it's an incomplete list. So there may be many more actually schools, but the ones that they note from India are Birla Institute of Technology and Sciences. Apparently they started a student managed fund in 2007, BIRLA. Goa Institute of Management, they seem to have started one in 2013. And the third one is Punjab College of Technical, the rest is not written here, and it says NA for when it was established. So there are 3 here from this paper that Professor Sincarini wrote. So again,
Thank you, sir.
Sure.
Dr. Simsek, also, I think, knowing just a little bit to be dangerous about the curriculum and how curriculum changes in the Indian schools and the MBA and the management schools, I think it's also important to go back to what you said, that some of the universities manage this as a club.
True.
And so if the professors are listening, they shouldn't feel discouraged that, oh my gosh, this will never get through the approval process, right? This is still possible in a club. And it also opens up, we're working with some impact investment organizations within GLIIF, right? So I hope that this conversation also stimulates those investors to think about this as another way to promote and to teach the next generation of investors, right, to think about ESG and to think about impact investing. So I wonder if you have any thoughts about those comments.
I wholeheartedly agree, Dr. Conway, because even though, again, we do it through a class, I can certainly see immense benefits with the student club approach too, in terms of continuity, in terms of how responsibility is transferred from one cohort to another cohort, in terms of the decisions not tied to a certain class and certain part of the year, so the decisions actually can be made throughout the year. So there are a lot of benefits, a lot of flexibility with that approach as well. And I do agree that that also creates a lot of flexibility from the investor's perspective too. So if there are donors who are interested in financing these initiatives through the recommendations of students, the student club actually creates that continuity as well. And as I mentioned earlier, the magnitude actually doesn't really matter. There are funds who manage just $2,000 as well as those crazy large funds too. So the amount really doesn't matter. Whatever the amount is, actually, it's a win-win situation. I mean, students learn, enterprises and entrepreneurs benefit, and investors also find a channel to their goals, objectives, dual objectives as well.
You're also making me think, Dr. Simsek, because one of the challenges that we're facing at the Global Links Initiative, the larger umbrella that GLIIF comes under, is how we become self-sustainable. And this idea might actually be an idea for us to also generate, so that we can continue to do programs like GLIIF, and that is if we have a small investment, and similar to the way the Crummer money goes back for student scholarship, could the investment money come back to promote programs like GLIIF and other elements of, so thank you for that. You just made me think of that. That's wonderful.
I'm happy to hear that.
Survi, sorry, I finished quizzing Dr. Simsek.
If anybody has any question you would like, if you'd like to unmute yourself and ask any question, you can ask. Students?
Yeah, I'm Ankita Chakraborty. I had a question.
Yes, Ankita, go ahead.
So a few days back, I saw an advertisement on Instagram. It was promoting the use of bamboo toothbrush with highlights saying "Go eco-friendly." I know this will reduce plastic waste, but it is again going to contradict with the cutting down of trees. The same is happening with the whole paper industry through many years. So should we count these kind of businesses under impact investment?
Very good question, Ankita, and that's why I really like the framework of impact management project, because on one hand, you see the benefits of some industries in terms of improving certain things in our environment, but on the other hand, maybe not so much. There are side effects. There are these risks, so to speak. Like say, even things such as electric vehicles, right? EVs. We're looking forward to them because no longer fossil fuel and other things, but they also have other issues, right? With some minerals like lithium and other types of things, like mining those minerals and materials they need. Does that have a bad environmental impact? So all these pluses and minuses should be considered. So I wholeheartedly agree that we can't just just look at on the face value. It says it says eco-friendly. This must be good. Well, not so fast. We should evaluate the pros and cons of all types of impacts of these things. So I just like you, I would be skeptical of any Instagram or Facebook advertisement that says things like that, and take them at their face value.
Amazing explanation, sir. Sir, I want to share one more thing, especially with the entrepreneurs. In some town in India, an amazing innovation has been done. What the business is doing is that they are collecting all the plastic waste, especially the thrown away packets. They are shredding it into threads and then sewing it into amazing handbags and plant pots. They are sewing it like in Bengal, we have taat industry, handloom industry. They are using those machines, small machines, and it doesn't require much more investment. So I will send the link. I saw it on Instagram only. I'll send the link with Sanchari or Survi. We will share it now.
That's great. That sounds like a great investment.
Thank you, Dr. Simsek. Thank you for all these wonderful answers that you've given us, and for this engaging, interesting webinar. We all know your last webinar was so successful, and it was a great learning experience for our students. And this was even more interesting, even better. And so I would just like to thank you for making time to do this for GLIIF and to speak to our students and volunteers. So thank you for taking time. And Sanchari, if you will screen share, I will just announce the next webinar and then we can close.
Yes, sure, sir.
Thank you for your kind words, Sophie.
Dr. Simsek, as we're pulling up for the next webinar and screen sharing, we do have some questions that came in on Facebook. So I want to encourage that person to reach out to us again, because we don't have time to answer it. But they're asking about how many students are interested in this elective and how the administrator decided on starting this course and promoting this course. So in other words, our dean, if you will.
All right. Yes, they should feel free to reach out to me, and I'd be happy to answer their questions.
Excellent. Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
So our next webinar is next Friday, as we all know. This webinar is by Dr. Vedant Das. It is about packaging for all the entrepreneurs who need support in packaging of products, food products, and cosmetics, anything. Be sure to attend this webinar. And the students, please make sure that your entrepreneurs attend this webinar. Thank you. Sanchari, you can now proceed with the screenshots.
Yes, so I request all of you to kindly switch on your videos if you feel like.